Hello everyone and welcome back to a new lesson. By now, you should have something beautiful or something that is work in progress. In my case, I have something that I hope is beautiful and is also work in progress. Today, we're going to discuss how you can create cinematics of your Unreal projects. And I want to stress that you should not wait to the end of your project to create cinematics. It's a good idea to create the cameras, animate them, and render your test shots as you are progressing on your project. In order to create and render cinematic shots of your project, you will need a sequencer. To create a sequencer, you can do that in two ways. The first method is by pressing Ctrl space and right click, go to cinematics and create a level sequence. This works. And the other method is that if you click here, so here it will show you a list of all sequence objects in the level, but if you have nothing, you will see nothing, but you're going to see two options: add a level sequence or add a sequence with shots. If I am going to create multiple shots, I usually go here and you will get this menu. You can give the sequence a name, a suffix, you can set a path, you can set how many shots you want to create. If you have a sequence that you want to duplicate, you can do that from here, and you can set the time of your shot and give even more names. I will leave everything at default, and the only thing I'm going to change is the base path. I will set this to my project location. So if we scroll down, we can find our current project, and I will add a slash here. I will select my project and I will also add a slash, and I will create a new folder called cinematics. Once you're happy, click on create level sequence with shots. Once you do that, this will open the sequence editor for you. You're going to see your shots and you're going to see all your 5 shots or more here, and if you double click on any of them, you're going to see a default camera and you're going to see something called camera cuts. This is really important. Sometimes you might render something and there is no image, so you need to make sure that you always have a camera cut, and from here you can also navigate to other sequences. Now, I press Ctrl Shift S to save everything, and I will click on this icon here to find my sequence in the content browser. Click here. Let's take a look at what Unreal made for us. So we made a folder called Cinematics, then it made a folder called Sequence, and that is the name of the folder that you can set from here. And if you press Ctrl space here, you're going to see the sequence root, and here you're going to see a folder called shot. So this sequence root here, it has the name sequence and the suffix root, therefore sequence root. If you open the folder shot, you're going to find the 5 shots we've made: shot 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. And if you open any of these folders, you're going to see the name of your shot _1, and you can set all these settings from here. Now, I will open only this shot level sequence, and here notice that there is only this shot open, compared to when you open your master sequence where you can add all your shots and export everything at once or create in-game cinematics. Now, let's press Ctrl space again to locate our shot. Let's open this and let's talk about what we see here. We mentioned that we have the camera cut, we have our cinematic camera, and here we have some buttons like save, browse to the asset, create a camera from the current view, render, and more. In order to pilot our camera, you click on this button, and from here you can move your camera to any place you like, and that will be the starting point. If you are familiar with video editing or programs like Adobe After Effects, you must be familiar with this view. Here we have our timeline, this is our playhead, and here are our tracks. Unreal Engine Sequencer is extremely powerful. You can literally animate anything you want. From here, you can add actors, and these actors can be cameras, can be lights, can be meshes, they can be anything. And there are multiple ways you can add actors to your sequence. So let's create a sequence from scratch. Next to our sequence here, So we right click, go to cinematics and create a level sequence. And let's keep it at the same name. If you double click this, you're going to see that we have an empty sequence. Notice when we made a new sequence, it's completely empty. But when we made a sequence with the button here, when we open that sequence, it adds the camera cut and the camera by default. So let's say you want to create from scratch, and let's say you like this view. You can create a camera from this view from here, and that will add the camera cut and the camera for you, or you can add an existing camera. So I press on these and delete, and let's say here we have a camera. Let me search if we have a camera. We don't have a camera. So to add a camera to your project, we can go to the create menu from here, or to place actors, and you can find this panel if you go to window and click on place actors. I will use this place actors, so if you click here, you're going to see cinematic and you're going to see these actors, and these same actors can be accessed from here. So here in this panel, we can find the cinematic button, and we have multiple types of cinematic actors. We have our default cinematic camera. So if you click and drag, that will add a camera for you. Press F to focus our selection. It's looking beautiful. And we also have the ability to add a camera rig crane. We can also add a camera rig rail. We can add a camera shake actor. So this is a blueprint to help us shake our camera for more realistic view. And we can also create a level sequence, just like we did from here. Cinematic level sequence. You can also click here, click and drag, and that will also add a level sequence. This level sequence, when you add it, you definitely need to set a level sequence asset so it would work. And if you click here, you can see all the level sequences in your project. For now, I will delete this level sequence. Notice that we've added a camera. So let's press on F again. To add actors to your sequence, you can click and drag from the world outliner to here, and that will add the camera for us. Or you can click on the add button here and you can add to sequencer. This will show you your world outliner. Also, if you have your camera selected or any actor selected, and you can click on the actor you want to add from your 3D viewport and click on add to sequence, and you're going to see that actor here. So for any reason, if I want to animate this umbrella, I can click on it, then go here, add to sequencer, and we're gonna see that actor. Let's stick to the camera for now. Let's click on add to sequencer, and add our cinematic camera actor. Now, if you see this button, it's piloting this camera, so you can change the location of your actors in multiple ways. You can find the actor and change it from here, the rotation and the location. So if I want to rotate it on the Z-axis like so, or you can simply click on this button to lock our view to that camera, and now we can freely fly around our world to scout for nice shots that we can take for our project. When you add any actor to your level sequence, you're going to see the tracks you can animate by default. In this case, when we add a camera, by default, we're gonna see the aperture, the focal length, the focus distance, and the transform. We have location, rotation, and scale. Scale would not matter in this instance, but for other actors, it might matter. You can expand to see the values. So the location, rotation, they are the same here. And notice when we have the sequencer open, if you look at the actor here, we also have these keyframes. You can literally animate almost anything you want. Or if you want to animate any of these options, you can click and that will add that option for you here, so you can start animating. But for now, I will right click and delete this option so we can keep things at default. In order to start animating your camera, go to transform, location, and rotation. You can expand them or collapse the view. And here we have these options. Add a new keyframe, move to the next keyframe, or go back to the other previous key. In this case, we want to add new keyframes to set the default values or the values that we have here. And and I will move my playhead to the end of my timeline. So right now it's set to 150. That's 5 seconds because we have 30 frames per second. And I want to move my camera, and now we can click on these buttons here: location, rotation. Now, I don't recommend animating this way because you want to find your view again. The moment you add any keyframe, it will kind of mess up the settings, so I cannot even find my villa. Let me show you another easy way, but let's just click on space to animate our view here. So that animated the location, not the rotation. Let me show you again what happened. I'm going to select these two keyframes, delete them, and I will set this wherever, and I will move my view, and I will click on rotation this time. It will animate the rotation, but every other keyframe, it was snapped to the default key or value we have here. So maybe you want this, maybe you don't. For me, I don't. The way I like to animate my actors is to have a couple of options enabled. And the first option is this: create a keyframe when any value or property change. So I will enable this. And now, since I have two keyframes, if I move or simply rotate, I'm gonna just rotate, it will add a keyframe for the rotation. And if I decide to move, it will also add a keyframe automatically for me to the location. And I can go here, press space, and that's the animation. That's it. See you guys in the next lesson. I'm kidding. Now, you can also expand the animation or make it shorter by clicking on this button here and drag. You will notice this is now extending our animation or making that animation slower. If I press on space, that will play the animation for us. Notice how the animation starts slow, it gets faster, and then it slows back again. Maybe you want this, or maybe you prefer to have a linear animation. If you click on this button here, show the animation keys in the curve editor, and click on any value you want to view, you can see the playhead again, you can see the timeline, you can see your actor, and depending on what value you select, you're going to see the curve animation for that value. So now press play, and it will slow down. So I will click on location, and these are now our keyframes. I will set this here next to my sequence view, and I will go back to the sequencer. You can select your keyframes from here or from the sequencer view, like so. Click and drag, that will create a marquee selection for us. And if you right click on any keyframe, especially if you have all selected, you're going to see the option Key Interpolation. By default, we have Cubic Auto. I use linear in most of my animations because I liked for the camera speed to be consistent. So if we click here, these will turn from a circle to a triangle. And if we play the animation now, the animation will have a constant speed. And if you want to view how this looks in the sequencer curves, you can see we have no curve anymore. So I will click on all these again, and I will right click, and I will set this to auto. Right now we have our curve. So it starts slow, fast, and it will slow back again. Let's play to see. Instead of selecting your keyframes, well, we still need to select our keyframes, but instead of right-click and change the key interpolation, notice how we have shortcuts. We have 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. 4 will set your keyframes to linear. So if you select your keyframes and press on 4, notice how this change. If you press on 1, it will set it to cubic interpolation, automatic tangents. If you press on 2, it's kind of the same, but now the tangents are not automatic. You can place or play with the tangents. If you press on 3, you can now break them. So we need some keyframes here. Right click, add a key. So this is auto. This is 2 flat tangents. 3 will break the tangents. 4 will turn the animation into linear. And 5 for constant interpolation. And the best way to explain this is to show you. So press 5. Now, if you press play on the transform, notice how it's jumping between the keys. And we can do the same here. We will not have animation. This is good for stop motion, for example. So There are very special scenarios where you want to use this, the constant interpolation. This might be good if you want to turn on a light instantly or if you want to achieve some cool effects. I will close the sequencer curves for now. I will delete the keyframe we added in the middle. I will select my keyframes and I will press on 4 again, and that's nice. Let me show you one example if you want to use the constant key. Now, again, this is creative freedom, it's up to you, but let's say to better explain it, I will click on the current focal length, add a keyframe here. And by the way, you can press on the value you want to animate and press on enter, and that will also add a keyframe for you. And now, let's say I want this value to be like this, 110. Now, if I play my animation, did you see that? We can notice how it's zooming in, zooming out, in, zooming out. Let's say you want for this animation to be sudden. We set 5, and now let's play the animation again. Now you can get an idea. So from here to here, it will retain the value 35, and then from here to here, it will retain the value 110, and it will retain the value 35 again. Play that again. There are so many scenarios where you might use this. For now, let's delete this and let's set this back to 35. So let's say we want to improve our animation or change it. Since we have this here enabled, all you need to do is to select a keyframe, change the animation to a place you like, and that will override the values for you. And then you can move here or delete these keys and then move the camera like so. That will add keyframes for us. And now press play. And that's beautiful. Now, notice when I add a new keyframe, it's always set to cubic. Maybe you want this, maybe you don't. You can change that from here. If you click here, for all new keyframes, you can set them to cubic, constant, linear, and so on. For me, I always use the value linear. And when I want to change it, I can simply right-click and change it. So let's say we want to export this animation as a test. In order to do that, we can click on this button here, render this movie to a video or image frame sequence, or you can go to Window, Cinematics, Movie Render Queue. Click this and you're gonna get this panel where you can add render jobs. So in our case, the render job here called new level sequence. Click and let's search for new level sequence. This is a new asset as you can see from here. Once you click on it, you're going to see the job name, the sequence, the map, the author, and the comment if you want to add these, if you're working within a team. You can also click, and drag. That will add your jobs for you, and you can save this view. This is something we do a lot. The queue, we have the render queue. If you add so many cameras to render, it's a good idea to save your render queue from here. We will talk about this later. You can see the settings and the output. Let's start with the settings. You can set a new settings if you click on this button here, unsaved configuration. And if you have saved configurations or presets, you can click here and you can select the preset you want. As you can see here, I have so many presets, one for lumen, one for path tracing, one for this machine, one for another, one in 1080p, one in 4K, and so on. The more presets you can generate, and as we learned, you can migrate these presets between your projects. So let's start with the default. If you click on unsaved configuration, this will open this panel for you, and the first thing you're going to see is the output. You can set where this sequence will be saved. You can set rules for naming the sequence. You can set the resolution. You can set a custom frame rate, and you can set other settings. And if you look here, this is really useful. We have level name, sequence name, job name, and they are also here. So if you want help with naming your image sequences or your folders, let's say every time I want to create a new camera, I want that camera to be saved under a folder called date. So I would add these and I would add the word date. And now if we render, Unreal will create a folder for us based on the date, and inside that folder we're going to see our image sequence. The other two settings we have here, so notice how we have three categories. We have settings, we have rendering, and we have exports. Under rendering, we have deferred rendering, and this is what we see here on our screen. JPEG, pretty self-explanatory. And if you want to save to other formats, you can click on setting here and you will find settings, exports, and rendering. Before I forget, if you don't see the movie render queue, and you will see it in 99% of your projects, if you go to edit, plugins, search for movie render, you're gonna find the movie render queue, and you may want to enable this if you want extra render passes and other options like panoramic pass if you want to render a 360 image. So by enabling this here, you're going to see some extra settings here. Now let's close the plugins and let's go back here. In addition to JPEG, if you click on setting, we can render to PNG and EXR image sequences. There is also BMB. EXR would be for your final exports. You can set the compression. I use Bees and Dawa. And EXR is perfect for color correction if you want to do more post-production on your renders. For now, we will keep things nice and small, keep it on JPEG. If you click here again, you're going to see other settings that we're going to discuss in a minute. You have anti-aliasing, burn-in, color output if you want to have a specific color profile. You have high resolution, console variables, and so on. If you also want to render another passes, you can do that from here. So we have detailed lighting only, unlit, panoramic, path tracing, you can do that from here, and UI render, we have these here. So these here, the detailed lighting and lighting only, you can also view them from here. So if for any reason you want to render this path, which is wow, beautiful, look at this, you can do that from here. Detailed lighting only, object IDs, and so on. So let's say you are happy with your settings. If this is a draft render, please don't render at 4K. I see too many people rendering at 4K at the start of the project and they are still like, this is draft. Render at the lowest resolution you can just to get an idea, and at your final stage of the project you can go 4K or whatever. Now if you want to save your configuration, you can click here, you can save the preset, or you can override other configurations if you updated one of them. So sometimes I would set this configuration, I click here, and I will do some adjustments in the location and whatnot, and then I can save on top of my preset, or save a new preset, or override another preset. For now, I will click here, keep things at default, and by default, this will save under your project, which is something I don't recommend. I highly recommend saving somewhere else. So right now, just for the sake of this moment, let's keep things at default and let's click on accept and let's click on render local. This will open for us the movie pipeline render view. It will compile some shaders, so we need to give it some time. Let's make some coffee. The engine is going to compile the shaders for the first time, and now every time you render, the render will go so fast. So that will be good. Now you may get some errors. In my case, I have a level that will be loaded only by blueprint, so some assets will not be visible, and that's what it says here. For now, that's okay. We can ignore this. If you want to view your animation, you can click on here and that will open the folder for you. Click and there we go. Now let's see the image sequence. Notice how Cesium terrain did not load. I will show you how we can fix this in a moment, or if you saw the moon tutorial, you already know. I appreciate you, but if you don't, it's okay. I love you too. Now if we play the animation, notice how this is loading around. You will definitely not want this, and here's the animation as we want it. It's beautiful. So in total we have 150 items or 150 files. To play the animation, I use DaVinci Resolve because it's my tool of choice for editing all the videos. Let's open it real quick and make a new project. So here we are in DaVinci Resolve. The best way to load your image sequences is to go to the first option here to load our assets. You can locate your project and you will get this view by default. What you need to do is to click on the three dots here and frame display mode. You can keep it at auto. Individual is what we have here, or you can set it on sequence. When you set this to sequence, it will merge just the view, everything into one file. So you can click and drag this file to your project, and now, or actually from here, you can also hover on top of your animation and play it, or you can create a new timeline. So I right click, create a timeline, or click and drag to add a timeline, and it will copy the settings of this image sequence. So the new timeline have the settings of 24 frames per second and it's 1080p. In my opinion, the best way or the best thing you can do is to create a timeline using the selected clip. Then don't use the project settings. From the format, set the timeline frame rate from 24 or from any value depending on your project to the target frame rate. So let's say 30, click on create and click play, and that will play 30 frames per second. Now, let's solve the problem of loading in the first few frames by going back to Unreal Engine. Let's switch this back to LED so we can get what we see. Click on unsaved configuration or your settings. Click on setting, add anti-aliasing, and this setting here, we can set render warm-up frames. Enable this and click on advanced, and you can increase these values here. So I can set the engine warm-up count to 100, for example, and the render warm-up count, you can increase this or keep it as it is for now. And just like everywhere in the engine, if you hover your mouse on top of any item, you can learn more about it. So now I click on accept and let's click on render local. Notice how it's warming up. After warming up, it will play the animation for us. Let's close this and let's open our output folder. And the first frame we see is our Cesium world and so on. So that's very cool. Let's keep going. Let's say it's time to animate another sequence. This is the sequence we've created earlier, and we have a few more sequences to animate. So let's open this sequence and let's do the same process as a recap. I will lock my view to the camera in order to pilot the camera. We already have this selected from the past sequence and this setting as well. When we create a new keyframe, it will already be set to linear. I will find a nice view, so I will pilot the camera, and to help you find views, it's really good idea to fly in the project and scroll down to simulate the camera animation you want to simulate. I always do this across all my projects where I just keep moving around the project and try to find nice angles. And I do that on multiple field of views. Let's say first I get all my wide angles like this, and let's say maybe it's time to focus more or to change the field of view. Sometimes I like to create a camera and change the field of view of that camera. So from here the focal length can change this. First, let's pilot that camera. There we go. And again, after I change my focal length, I pilot my scene, trying to find nice angles. If you don't want to do this, just to quickly pilot around, I like to go to the burger menu here and to change my field of view, just to pilot around and find nice angles. So I recommend doing this on multiple camera settings to find the best views you can find, and then you can go to the sequence and start animating. Let's say I spark some curiosity when we went earlier to the create menu here, cinematic, the camera rig, and the camera rail. I will add the camera rig rail, set it somewhere, press on F to focus my selection, and as you can imagine, our camera will move on this rail. So I press Shift to move with my selection. Then I'll switch quickly to the details panel and press on F to be around our selection here, and I will move this slightly up. And I'm trying to find the rail component, the spline component. We cannot see it for some reason. So perhaps if we click here on the rail spline component, this will show us the component that I was looking for. So click on one of these points and now you can extend your rail. And just like Cesium cartographic polygon, all splines in Unreal Engine, when you hold Alt and move, that will create a new point for you. And if you click on the camera rig rail, you're gonna see the settings we have. We have the current position on rail. It's set to 0 and it goes from 0 to 1. And that's really nice if you want to animate your camera or objects on a specific path. So let's say select this, move it up, and now select the rig again, move, and that will move up. And to visualize what's happening, all you need to do is to select a specific camera and add it as a child to the rail. And now, if you animate the rail, the camera will follow. However, if you want the camera exactly here, select the camera and set the location to 0, 0, 0, and it will snap on our rail here. So let's also reset the rotation, and now click on the rail. Let's move it up a little bit so it's above the ground. And now let's try animating the camera, and you can see it's following the path. Let's say I don't like the direction of the camera, so we can rotate it by 90 degrees or minus 90, depending on the direction you want the camera to look at. So I will click here. We also have lock orientation to rail. If you do this, it will lock the orientation. So now if we change the current position, we have like a nice ride now. This is so fun. Whee! Sorry, this is really cool. If you don't want this, you can simply disable the button and it will stay locked on the exact rotation it has. These are here the two main settings you want to control on the camera rig rail: the position on the rail and the orientation on the rail. In addition to having a rail, we also had the crane. So if you click and drag the camera crane, it looks like a crane and it acts like a crane. So we have the pitch, the yaw, the arm length, and the ability to lock the mount pitch and lock the mount yaw. Just like we've added the camera as a child here, we can add another camera to this crane here. So I go to the add menu, cinematic, click on cinematic camera actor, click and drag on top of the camera rig crane. And you can set the location to the 0, 0, and 0. And now our camera is under the crane here. So if you select the crane and change the pitch, it will change like so. So if you're looking to create realistic camera animations, then this is the way. You can change the arm length and you can lock the mount on the pitch axis and or the yaw axis. So now if we like to change the camera pitch and yaw, it's following the exact directions. If we unlock, it will retain its original rotation. You can also animate the crane on the rail, so that's even more cool. So now we can click on the crane and set the values to 0, 0, 0, and click here, change the value even more. And if you want to animate these in the sequencer, you can open your level sequence and you can select the actors you want to animate and add them here. Now, notice that the settings we have here are not here. You can add them from here if you click on add keyframe to this property. That will add a property for us. But also notice that we have this plus button here. And from here, we can add tracks. Click and you're gonna find all these options. You can find the options to the components. So the crane camera mount, the pitch control, the yaw control, and the transform component if you want to change the location. And you also have the crane controls. So these are here the exact same settings that we saw here. And if you click on the rail, click, you're gonna see we have the components and we also have the rail controls. So we have the current position on the rail, click here. If you want to change this to 0, add a keyframe, move it, add another keyframe, or simply create an animation. Since we have add a keyframe automatically enabled, it will add that keyframe for us. And now if we play the animation, we can see how this is changing, which is very nice. So let's say we want to animate this on our street. We can click on the rail and notice that we can also select our actors from here when we have the sequence open. You can do that from the word outliner and you can do that from here. Now I have the rail selected. I can click, move, and press shift to move my camera with my selection. Place it here, press F to focus my selection and set it here. And let's see, play the animation, extend it. Let's pilot our camera. Well, not this camera. Let's delete this camera and let's click on the rail again. And I'm glad I deleted the camera because I'm going to show you something. So let's select this camera. Let's add that camera to here. And let's say for any reason, this is the animation we want. We could improve it, but please bear with me. Let's say this is the animation we want, and let's say we want to render. Render, let's delete the new level sequence. Now this is our new render. And I will clear the configuration, so we have the default settings. And now, because I mentioned earlier, I don't recommend to save under your project location. I highly recommend having some sort of special drive or folder where you save your cinematic shots. So let's set a location for this. I will click here, and I will click here, and I will find a specific location. Let's say under a specific volume, you have a folder called Cinematic Renders, and that is nice. That's good enough. Select that folder, and let's say every time we render, we want a new folder inside that folder. We can add slash and then add these two brackets or special brackets, the format strings. And let's say we want the job name to be the name of that folder. We can press on job name and file name format, sequence name, frame number. You can be more descriptive in the file name format. I have this as an example. You can have the name of the camera, name of the room, the type of the lens, and whether this is vertical or horizontal, or any information you want. So name of the asset, if we are rendering assets, name of the view, name of the camera, any notes and so on. Maybe you can add day, night. So it's a good practice to take care of the file name format, not keep it just a sequence name and frame number. However, for now, we will keep things at default, or in addition to that, we can add another dot, and this will allow us to set any of these settings from here. So a render path or the output resolution, this is good, and other settings. Let's say the output resolution as of now, and let's click on accept. Now, let's render this. Notice how the camera is in the same position. Like, this is the worst render anyone can render, and I cannot tell you how many times I fell in this trap where I delete the camera and I forget to change the camera cut. So now, if I open my output folder, you're gonna see like, oops, where is my render? It's just one image and it's not in the right location. Why did that happen? I need you to be careful when you delete a camera from an image sequence. When you do that and add another camera, you also need to update the camera cut. So in this case, you can right click and change the camera. In this case, we need to select this camera and this will update this for us. And now it's gone from red to blue, and that's perfect. Or if you delete the camera cut and simply click on camera, you can select the camera from here. And based on the location of your playhead is going to add that camera cut from here moving forward. So if I set my playhead to the frame 0 and I add my camera cut again, that's perfect. Now, let's render this real quick. As you can see, we have the default view we want. I made a mistake in naming my files. Here, the errors we're getting, the files may be overwritten. So we need to fix the name of the file. Let's go back to our render and take a look. We just have one file. So let's go back to unsaved config and take a look at what happened. So sequence name, output resolution. When I added that dot, it removed the frame for some reason. So we can add that, the frame number. So let's add these two brackets and add frame number. Don't go away, please. Again, click accept, click render, and now we should be good. So if you go to the file here, it's now adding our keyframes as intended. So when you delete a camera, don't forget to update the camera cut. So moving forward, let's say we are happy. This is our first file sequence here. It's perfect, it's beautiful. It's kind of not the best view, but let's move on to the next. So I'm gonna open this shot here. This is shot number 2, and I will find another place or another shot. Let's say this here. I will set the focal length to 13. And if you don't want to set this manually, let's talk a little bit about the camera settings. So if you click on a camera, let's expand the details panel. Notice how many settings we have. We have look at tracking settings. So this is really nice option if you want to track a specific actor while your camera is moving. For example, we want to track this sofa. I can enable this and I can select an actor to track. let me find that sofa again. It won't find because now it's looking at the 0, 0, 0. We need to stop piloting the camera for a second. This is our camera selected. And let's say we want to track this sofa or any other actor. All you need to do is to go to Actor to Track, select it from the list, or click on Pick Actor from the scene. This eyedropper icon here, click, and it will select the actor for us. And now, if I move my camera anywhere, I will look here, it will snap to the view. So let's set the first location and let's move the playhead and let's set this to the second location. Now, notice how it's always tracking that actor for us, which is very nice if you want to track a specific actor. In addition to tracking actors, we also have, so let me disable this and let's play the animation. Now it's playing normal. And if I want to do this, it will do exactly that. But if I enable this again, it will override my rotation. It will track this actor for us. Now I will disable this, and under Filmback, if you expand it, you have the sensor width, the sensor height, and you can change these or invert them if you want to capture a story for Instagram, for example. And in addition to changing the values manually here, you can also click on the list here and select some real-world cameras and presets. IMAX 70mm, 35 full aperture, Super 16mm, DSLR, full frame DSLR, and so on. So if I set to full frame DSLR, you're gonna see that the sensor aspect ratio changed from 1.777 to 1.5, and it will act like a full frame DSLR. So if you want to simulate real-world cameras, you can do that from here. So in addition to setting the Filmback, you can also set the lens settings. Right now, it's using universal zoom, and you can change this to any value you like. However, you can set your camera to a specific lens. You can set it to 50mm. Unreal, don't crash, please. Thank you for not crashing. Now, as we said, you can set it to 50, 85, 105, 200, and you can also set for a specific zoom between 24 and 70mm. So if I set this, click on universal zoom, there's a problem with that. So let me reset the full frame DSLR and let's try this again. For some reason it's not working, but there we go. For some reason it worked. That's funny. So this is 105, and no matter how you change this, it will not affect the lens settings because we have the min and the max focal length set to 105. We have the min f-stop, the max f-stop. So if you are familiar with photography, you should be familiar with many of the settings here. This is especially useful for motion blur, exposure compensation, and so on. For some reason, I have to click here multiple times in order for this to work. So let's reset things to default and keep moving forward. In addition to Filmback and lens settings, we also have the focus settings. So let's pilot our camera to somewhere nice, and let's say we want to focus on this plant. If you want to focus this, you can set the focus method from manual to tracking a specific actor, just like we did with Lookat tracking settings. So let's keep it at manual. From here, we have the manual focus distance. It's set to 10,000 units. You can decrease this, and that will slowly bring things into our focus. And that's looking much sharper now. And if you want to help setting the focus, you can click on this button where we can draw the debug focus plane. So enable this, and we're gonna see the focus plane, and we can change the color. Usually we keep it on purple. And now, based on where this plane is, our focus will be. And that's also very cool. So let's say I want to focus on this plant here. Then all we need to do is to bring it within focus. And if we disable this, right now, this is imperfect focus and everything else is not. You can reset the value, or you can completely disable the focus method. For some reason, this bug is still happening. So let me try this without being in the camera. I will switch this to disable. There we go. So now we have our camera, but our camera does not have focus settings. Everything will be in perfect view. which is something you may or may not want depending on your preference. Sometimes I have two types of cameras where I have my focus method enabled, and sometimes I have another camera where I have no depth of field because I want full crisp image. And moving forward, we have crop settings, and this does exactly what it says. You can basically crop the aspect ratio. So let's say you want this for Insta, you can do that, or you can change the Filmback. So you have two options to do that. Click here to reset to default. Let's close this. Here you have the focal length, current aperture. So the focal length, pretty self-explanatory, is the same as we have here. And the aperture will affect the light and also the depth of field. Let's set these to default and let's keep moving forward. Under advanced, you can set the custom near clipping plane. So let me show you. If I get too close to an object, like so, but you don't want this, then you can set this to 1 if you want, or keep it at 10. And you can also change this behavior from the console commands. Sometimes you're working with some objects and you don't want for the clipping to happen. You can go to the console command, type r set near clip plane, and you can set it to 1. The default value is 10. Now it's set to 1. So you may want to enable this here when you are rendering, so your renders will be exactly as you want. In addition to the camera settings here, the other settings you want to take a look at are the camera options. If you want to blend with the post-process or not, you can set this to 0 sometimes if you want to override the post-process. And you can also go down here where you have the post-processing on the camera itself. You can set the length, the color grading, the global illumination, everything we have in our post-process volume. You can access the important settings individually from here on each camera you have. So let's quickly do some cool animation. So I'm gonna set my camera here. I will set my focal length to 12. I will pilot my camera. So don't forget to not pilot your camera. I always also forget to do this, which is funny. Let's say start from here. I will move. It has this keyframe. You can delete it. And let's say move to a place you like on the rotation and the location. And once you're happy, you can set this to whatever you want. And now click on play. It's beautiful. Let's say you want to extend this animation. You can do that in two methods. The first method is by selecting the selection range here and move it. So let's say 210 or 300 or whatever you like. That's one method, by moving the selection range from here. The other method, and the one I prefer, is to switch our view from the normal default viewport to the cinematic viewport. When you enable your cinematic viewport and you have a sequence open, you're going to see the start of your animation from here. And at the very end on the right, you're going to see the end of your animation. So from here, you can set the value manually by clicking and dragging, or you can type 150 or 300 or whatever you like. You can also do the same to any actor you have by click and drag, or right click, go to properties and set the section range end to any value you like. So right clicking and setting the properties will happen on some tracks, not all of them, and other tracks like the keyframe here, you can click on that and right click and go to set key time. Then you can set the new time for your keyframe. Now, if we play the animation, it will be much slower. Let's say we're happy with this. Let's say the volumetric cloud is a good candidate. Click add this. Let's say the layer height is a good candidate just to see. You can click on the volumetric cloud component first, and then from here, you can find the other settings you can animate. If you don't want to do that, you can simply click on any of these buttons here to animate the value you want to animate. So the layer height is set to 8. That's cool. And let's say we want to start from 0. We can do that. Let's add a keyframe to that. We also need to set it on here to 8. So now it goes from 0 to 8. Let's play that animation. let's keep going. So now I don't want to animate the clouds. I just wanted to show you that we can animate anything almost in the sequencer. Now let's open our master sequence that was created for us when we created our sequences from here. If you press on play, you're gonna see that this is our first camera and it will cut to our second camera. And you can imagine if you animate all these cameras or have many other cameras that are animated, you can place them all in the timeline here and have something beautiful to show to others. You can either put all your cameras here and all your other actors, and that's something I highly recommend doing, or you can export your shots one by one and then animate or play with the editing of your shots in a program like DaVinci Resolve, and that is something I also recommend doing. To be honest, I do both. I have fun in Unreal Engine and I can always view my cinematics with the music and everything. So here you can also add wave files to play with the music, so you can cut to the music. And I also use DaVinci Resolve for more creativity and post-process effects. Now, let's say you want to render your shot or shots. You can go and click on render this movie to a video or image sequence. Then we can set our settings. So let's go to unsaved configuration, click on setting, click on anti-aliasing. If you want better quality, you can increase the spatial sample count and the temporal sample count. You can set this to 4x4 or 8. So the more you increase this, the higher quality we're going to get. And when you increase the values here, we get a warning: temporal anti-aliasing does not converge when using an even number of samples. Disable TAA or increase the sample count. So we either need to increase this or we want to override anti-aliasing and set any of these settings or keep it to none. Now, I will have another video where we take a much deeper look into anti-aliasing and other settings. If you also go to the setting here and go to console variables, from here you can add console variables. One of the most common console variables I use for my renders is the screen percentage size. So if you type R and screen percentage, click here, and from here the default value is 100. You can set to 200 or 150 depending on the output quality you're rendering at. So 200 is good if you're rendering at full HD, 100 if you're rendering at 4K, because this will drastically take the GPU resources you have, and it might even crash if you go too extreme with the console variables and anti-aliasing settings you have. So from here, I will close the panels and I will go to settings and I will open any of the settings I have here. Let's take a look. I usually render at EXR DAWA because this one have a good file size and it retains all the color information and the alpha channel as well. Deferred rendering is fine. I like to render detailed lighting because it has a really cool effect. Under anti-aliasing, I use these settings, but they are not set of stone. You can use any settings you want. This is depending on your project and it's a trial and error depending on the resources you have and so on. In terms of console variables, as I mentioned, I mainly use this. However, there are console variables for reflections, for the motion blur, for the global illumination, and much more. I will put in the description of this video some console variables you can use for you to test, and that should be it for most settings you have. Under debug options, you don't need this. Game overrides, if you want to override a user interface you have, but generally, you don't need this. And under output, I save level name, sequence name, frame number, the defaults, and specific file. So date, and then I type the type of lighting I have. So day lighting, night lighting, it really depends. So from here, you can simply set the values you want, click on accept. Once you're happy with your settings, you can click on render local, give the computer the time it needs to finish rendering. I hope you found this lesson useful. If you do render some visuals, I'd really love to take a look at what you've created so far. And if you have any questions, let me know in the comments. If you enjoyed this video, that makes me happy. Thank you for watching. Happy learning, happy rendering, and I will see you in the next one. Take care.